Okay, my name is Wolfgang Mar. I'm owner and founder of Governance and Continuity, a small consulting and training company located in Switzerland. But I am involved in international projects, so actually most of my business is sometimes out of the country. But it's a good place to put the business in and to start a business. This is the foundation of my my business. Okay, you may reach me on our website, continuity.ch or to continuity.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and European Network Sync. I'm on Twitter and I operate a YouTube channel as well, in case you're interested. So let's start the presentation. What it is all about, as already said in the intro, why a BIA, why it's so important, what is the position or the location of the BIA in the BCM lifecycle, what would be the outcomes, what would we expect, how would the BIA support the BCM goals. We're not doing this for fun, but we have to support certain goals. Then I'd like to have cast some light on a recent ISO standard on the BIA, 22317. It helps implementing the BIA. Then let's talk about some BIA approaches, how to perform the BIA, which is actually also explained in this ISO standard. What are the challenges? And finally, I would like to give an example of tools which might be used in this context. It's a graphical tool which helps implementing and understanding the situation. And this is an appeal to do the BIA in a structured way in order to do it correctly. As I always try to point out, if we're not doing it correctly, if we're omitting something, if we're forgetting something, then it's not a good foundation. And finally, let's wrap up with some BIA critical success factors. What should be observed? What should you do to make the BIA really a success? Okay, I'm not going to read through the abstract. This is for further reading, or if you want to go into more details. So let's start with the main subject of why BIA, why it is so important. As we will see in a second, BIA is a cyclic process, and we cannot assume that we do a BCM approach once and forget it, so it will be repeated again and again. And for every circle, for every rotation of this BIA wheel, we have to do a BIA and obtain the critical data to put the BCM process upon. As good practices declare that BCM is based on a continuous improvement process, BIA also plays an important role because it tells us what has to be improved in terms of obtaining the critical parameters of a BIA. So once again, if you do it one time, it's maybe a good approach, but it's certainly not sufficient. So we have to do it again and again in order to obtain a continuous improvement of our BCM approach. In many cases, business processes are not very well designed and not very well documented, and if we are forced to look at this process during these processes during a BIA, then it's a nice fallout. It's a nice added value to know the processes better and make them more robust, even if we're not thinking of any business interruptions. Finally, and that's also underlined in the new standard and in all the good practice guidelines, the BIA is a base for the development of a business continuity strategy, or one or more of these strategies. So this is really an important stuff, really to build, like we see it in this picture, to build a solid building on sensible foundations. Oh, that was too much. Again, second slide on via BIA. We certainly, by inspecting all the process and dependencies and interdependencies, internally and externally, we will certainly get an insight on increasing the efficiency of the organization. So again, even without thinking on a business interruption, we learn much more about the inner workings of our organization, and this helps even in daily life. Maybe this is an argument to, kind of quotes, to sell the BIA to top management. So it's not just a cost factor or cost element, but it even helps in day-to-day operations. If we think on company or business development, then the BIA may help us on evaluating strategic planning options or different strategic options. Again, as a byproduct of better knowing the company and inner processes, we can support top management in taking one or the other decision. If we know that a certain supplier is not very stable, not very reliable, if we know that a certain logistics chain is not working, not always working as planned, then we can develop an alternative and make the company more robust and more resilient, maybe even helping in company development. This goes hand in hand with the next item, long-term strategy decision making. If we know that certain processes, certain environments, suppliers, internal, external, internal departments or external partners are not very reliable, or in the other hand are very well, very powerful and very well performing, then this gives a hint on how to develop the company and to make it more competitive in the marketplace at the end of the day. Finally, we also touch and see some synergies with risk analysis or risk management. Of course, we talk about risks, and the BIA is a tool which might help us in performing risk analysis or risk assessment. By the way, the foundation standard ISO 22301 actually asks for a risk assessment when performing or when implementing a BCM approach. So it's not an option, but it's a must. And in many companies there are already departments and organizations dealing with risk assessment and risk management. Okay, to come back what I've said earlier, where is the BIA in the so-called BCM Lifecycle? It's right at the top at the 12 o'clock position. The Business Continuity Institute, one of the largest professional organizations for BCM professionals, puts it right at the top, and that's actually where the BCM lifecycle starts. You cannot start with determining a strategy at 3 o'clock or developing a re-implementation or response at 6 o'clock. Some companies, some organizations start with just implementing a BCM response, or they do some exercises and some tests, but this is not the best practice approach. You really have to start with understanding the organization. In the flagship ISO standard on business continuity, ISO 22301, we see this graphics of the so-called Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, which is another business continuity management cycle. And again, the BIA is a part of this larger cycle again. This cycle also shows us implicitly or explicitly the inherent mission of continuous improvement. At 12 o'clock we have the planning phase, 3 o'clock the doing phase, 6 o'clock the review phase, and this is followed by an acting phase. It's also called, as we see in the bottom line, it's the PDCA cycle, which which shows the elements of continuous improvement. So as I said earlier, BIA is a part of this life cycle again, and contributes to an improvement of the BCM approach, improvement of the preparedness, improvement of the outcome, which is the resilience. So what are the major outcomes? Time does not permit to go in too much detail, but let us focus on some main points which have been derived from experience, good practices, and the ISO standard 22317, which just has been released a month ago. Let's start with the scope of the BC program. First of all, we have to, if we think of implementing business continuity, we have to think on a scope. We have to include and exclude certain elements or locations or departments of the organization, thinking of following a risk-based approach. So those parts of the organization which we think are important or critical should certainly be in scope, and other departments or locations maybe can be left out of scope for the time being. Finally, of course, they have to be included, but when first doing a BC approach, we probably have to limit ourselves to certain areas of the organization. And we have to start with an assumption, and this assumption is then validated by the BA. It might well be the case that the scope has to be changed if we understand the organization better after the BA has been executed. Then there might be changes to the scope, and maybe the scope has to be enlarged, or maybe we can skip some parts which we thought they should have been in the scope in the first place. So it's a validation of the scope to really be sure that we are addressing the core of the organization. We certainly have to find out about the requirements or the business continuity requirements of the organization. This is coupled with the next two bullet points, the determination of the impact over time of disruptions. And the core of the matter probably is the identification of the relationships between products, services, processes, activities, and resources. The main goal of a business continuity actually is to maintain a certain level of operation, a certain output, a minimum output of the organization of their products and services. It might be things which have to be produced, like cars or TV sets or cans or whatever, or it might be services like electricity, like mobile phone services, or a call center of an insurance company. So we have to identify the main products and services which we should be able to produce even when something happens to our operations, if something happens on a larger scale, not a small incident, so that the production is actually hampered. Of course, these products and services are being made available by internal and external processes, and processes in this context are divided into activities, and all this is driven by resources. It's human resources, it's technical resources like electricity, water, suppliers of all kinds, heating, cooling, building, air conditioning, whatever. So the interrelationship between these four entities, the core product, services, processes, activities, and resources, is actually the heart of the outcome of the BIA, which should really be addressed and properly addressed during this analysis. Let's focus finally a bit on the resources which I've been talking about. We will see more examples. In the next line, it's certainly facilities. Without buildings or factories, you probably can do a lot. We certainly need people with specific skills. So if half of your production staff is sick, then you probably cannot put a telephone operator or a call center agent onto the shop floor. So we have to have the people with certain skills. We have to manage and properly work with assets. We have the question, the challenge of supplies or suppliers. As I gave some examples, like, well, let's just say electricity. Without electricity supply, we probably cannot do a lot. We have supplies in form of half-finished goods. So if I am an assembly plant and I need wheels and engines and paints, whatever, for my cars to be produced, these resources or these parts have to arrive in time. Otherwise, my production line will stop, and the output is cut to zero or to a very low level, and my customers won't be happy with this interruption. Finally, especially in a crisis, financial resources are important. This has something to do with the ability to do money transfers from your production side, from your offices. Again, you need electricity, you need IT resources, you need networks. If you are cut off from these resources, you cannot transfer, receive, or process any financial transactions. So if we go into details when doing the BIA, we very often see or discover things which have not been known to a wider range of people in an organization, but maybe just in one or two persons' heads. But this is of course not sufficient, and we have to identify all those single point of failures in order to do something against it. If we find out that we are depending on one single supplier or one single piece of equipment, a machine or a special part, then we should take actions and reduce this dependency. The last line, okay, dependencies and interrelationships, I think I gave some examples. We certainly are depending on internal and external resources like people, assets, suppliers, and the tricky part when doing the BI is actually to find out all about the interrelationships between these resources. So It's a kind of pyramid which we have to explore from top to bottom in order to really find out what are we really depending on. If you look at the pyramid from the top, you say, okay, I've got my PC, I've got my notebook, I can work, but if you drill down, you see you have to have a network, you have to have electricity, you have to have a building, whatever. In the end, it's the situation in most cases the situation is much more complicated than in the first moment. First moment when doing a BIA, it seems to be yes, we know about everything. We know, okay, this and this resource or this process has to work. But when drilling down to the deepest and lowest resource, people are shocked most of the time to realize when they realize, okay, we haven't thought about that. For example, one customer once told me, we have found out that if we haven't got water for 2 hours, then we have to shut down our office and send the people home, because without a water supply, they determined they cannot operate the building. People need water. Probably their IT infrastructure needed water. So a simple resource like water, if you think it to the end, is all of a sudden of paramount importance. Okay, we all do this to support certain BCM goals. It's the part. It's the foundation of the BCM lifecycle. Actually, what we don't want to do is not only protecting the integrity of our staff, which is so omnipresent that it's not on many slides, but it's certainly important protecting the company value and its reputation. You can imagine that if you are experiencing a business interruption and you are not handling it correctly, not handling it in a manner that the public and your customers are more or less happy with it, or they say, okay, they did a good job, then you not only will suffer a short-term financial loss because you were not able to supply and sell your products and services, but also your reputation might be damaged. There are examples of good and handling of crisis with more or less success. So be this interruption as well. If we think and come back to what I said earlier, to make the company more resilient even before something serious happens, we can contribute to increasing the shareholder value and projecting an image of a proactive company management. But finally, one of the goals certainly is to assure the survival of the company if really something seriously happens. And it's then your parachute or your airbag or your crumpling zone of a company if you are well prepared in this context. So it's really betting the company. Okay, let us have a short look on this new ISO standard, which I have to update. Third line, it already has been published a couple of weeks ago. So it's available from ISO.org or your local national standards body. This standard has been developed by ISO TC Technical Committee 292, Security and Resilience. I'm a member. I'm a Swiss representative in this TC, and already participated in the development of the 22301, and the 22317 is one of the younger members of this family of standards. It's called a DTS. It's now actually it's a technical specification. I have to update the slides. D is for draft before the publication, and now as it has been published, it's just A, as the headline says, ISO TS technical specification, which actually is a guideline document. There is no possibility to get certified against the 17 standard. The only standard in this range of families, in this range of standards, as we see on the fourth line, the 01, the 13, and the 00. The only standard which you as an organization can be certified against with is a 01. So the 01 actually is the certification standard. The 13 is a guidance document, again explaining how to implement BCMS, and the 00 standard is just a glossary, a dictionary of terms, which helps to a certain degree to unify the language and the expressions in this context. But I have to admit the challenge of standardizing the wording and standardizing expressions is a mammoth task, because there are so many different views and expressions that we can try, but I'm not sure if we ever can succeed. For example, the definition of risk. I think within ISO alone there are many definitions of risk, so probably there will not be a global or globally binding definition of certain terms, but we in the technical committee try to narrow down the choices and try to standardize the terms to a certain degree. Okay, let's come back to the 17 standard. It's focusing on performing the BIA. It considers the BIA to be a project, so we need all the project planning and project management tools. We shouldn't start the BIA without having project management in place. It's a small project. It has a start, it has an end, but it's a kind of periodic project. After a while, we will come back and do another BIA. Then again, it's a project. But the bottom line is it shouldn't be done without proper planning and taking care on or thinking about how to perform the analysis. So the main results, or the main points the main deliverables are product and service prioritization. As I said earlier, one of the goals of BIA is to find out what level of output, what level of performance are we supposed to maintain during an incident, what can we do, what is expected by our customers, whatever. And we can then go down one level to the processes which support the product and service delivery. We have to analyze these processes, and as I explained earlier, the processes in this context are composed of activities which are smaller parcels of work, smaller chains of tasks or activities, and we have to drill down, as I said earlier, from the product and service level down to the activity level to really find out about all these dependencies and interrelationships. After Having done the analysis, of course, we need to go through a consolidation phase, because when doing a BIA, which is done by gathering information from key players within the organization, typically through interviews, we will find out that there are contradicting views on what is important, what is not important, contradicting views on what is critical for the operation, and there is also a kind of competition between different locations, or between different departments. If we do these interviews, we ask those process owners actually, what are your requirements for maintaining, or what do you need to maintain your business in a critical situation? And the answers will probably be that everyone is very much important, and would need actually a duplication of the department in case of business interruption, which means the ideal preparation, or the ideal solution would be a duplication of the whole organization, which is simply not realistic. So we have to cut down the appetite and the requirements of the different departments and locations and divisions to a level which top management can endorse. So the consolidation serves to reduce the requirements to a level where top management says this is what we want. We cannot afford too much a duplication of every resource, but what should the residual risks be? What is our risk appetite? What is the basic tone, or the basic element of the next element in the BCM Lifecycle? What would be the basis for the strategy? This closes actually the circle. We do the BIA in order to be prepared, to be ready to talk and select business continuity strategies. And there are even schools of thought which say, okay, we do a BIA and subsequently we do a business continuity strategy, but maybe if we find out that the strategy is too costly, we have to be more modest in our requirements according to the BIA. But this is a fine line which I don't want to explore too much in detail. Basic line is we have to get the results, consolidate them, and get the top management endorsement. Only after top management has acknowledged that the results are acceptable or are balanced in terms of financial impact and a degree of protection, we can consider the BIA to be finished. The standard also has two annexes on terminology mapping. As I said, many terms are swirling around the globe, and in order to have a common language, we have put in a terminology mapping. Even in the English-speaking world, there are up to 3, 4, 5 expressions for the same item. But if we think about other languages, the problem even gets worse. So terminology is important. And finally, there is a guidance or a list of how to collect the information in the BIA. As I briefly said, typical method is interviews, but we may also work with workshops. There might be other methods like brainstorming. The idea is really to get the results in a systematic, in an economical and complete way. Talking about different BI approaches, we can take cue on or take ideas from leading publications like the standard which I just talked about, and for example the VCI's Good Practice Guidelines to address the challenge of understanding the organization. If we look at this image, I guess that I took the picture, so I know what it is, but if you look at it, you might have a problem because it's a two-dimensional picture of a three-dimensional object, and it's similar to what we experienced during a BIA. We see a complex organization, have to put it on two-dimensional paper. So we have to go down and drill down in our toolbox and find out what the best approach would actually be. For example, a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. There are methods of how to obtain the information, like questionnaires and workshops. And one of the main questions actually is whom to address or whom to her job or operating a machine, probably does not know about the processes this machine or his or her work is involved with. So we have to try to get hold of what I call the middle management or the process owners, those persons who really know about the details and the big picture of how the core processes in the company actually are running and what are they depending on. So challenges are actually to, as we see in this picture, to go down into details, but not too much. So we should try to find out what the soft or high or hot spots are without leaving any white spots with undetected dependencies or undetected interrelationships. So we have to find out what is the right effort, the right level of effort contributing to a certain degree of correctness and completeness. The risk, of course, is maybe similar to when doing an audit, not to oversee something which might pose a serious problem later down the road, later in the business, in the BCM life cycle. So we really have to go down into detail to understand what it's all about, the details, and finally obtain a complete picture. So let me briefly introduce a tool which has been used in various areas, including business continuity. It's a graphical tool called Socrates Maps, which is an electronic kind of spreadsheet where you can, let's say, where you can express the maturity or degree of risk of certain elements in a company, be it processes, be it resources, whatever, that's up to you. So if we briefly go from left to right, I don't know if you see you can read the text of the defined text on your screen. On the right, on the left, we have the main areas which are broken down into smaller areas. Maybe this can be by department or by location. And if we, to the right, we are adding just as many fields as we need of, let's say, dependencies or situations of tools, resources, and one or more persons can then actually express their view on how well these smaller building blocks are doing. So there might be green, yellow, orange, white, blue rectangles indicating or giving an overview on how a certain person or a group judges a certain situation. And the nice thing is we can several persons or groups do this kind of survey, and let's say one group says, okay, if you go to the third column, customers is fine, but another group says, okay, customers is not fine. So this gives a basis for discussion and serves to obtain a common view. That's actually the challenge with the BIA. For example, if we take this example of an elephant, depending on the point of view, everyone has a different view. So the person on the left says, okay, it's a spear, it's a snake, oh, it's a tree. For one other person, it's a wall. But actually, it's nothing of, nobody's right, but only the common view expressing or putting together, consolidating all the views really helps us giving a right and a correct picture of the situation. And I think this is a good example of what we have to achieve during a BIA. Everyone has a view, purchasing has a view, IT has a view, sales has a view, production has a view, and everyone sees sees the operation of the company from their perspective, whereas we need to get an overview and really have to determine the shape of the elephant, you know. And these tools, as an example, I'm using these type of maps, help us obtain a true and fair view. Okay, the benefits of this tool actually is it has a psychological background, and probably you have had an experience that or describing a situation or a problem in a graphical way, in an optical way, helps the brain much better than lots of lines and characters and words. You know, this page has a lot of lines, a lot of characters, and it's completely different to a picture where we immediately get an overview. And due to the construction of the setup of these maps, we are being helped to obtain a complete and a holistic view on the situation. The nice thing is actually that we can use a drill-down principle. So depending on the level of view or the altitude, we may start with a kind of helicopter view, having a broad picture. But if we identify problems or action items in one of these boxes, we can drill down one or two or more levels to obtain a more detailed view, especially if there is no consensus on the big picture. If somebody says, oh, it's fine, and the other one says, no, it's risky, then we can and we have to address the situation and find out the truth by drilling down and by analyzing the situation in greater depth. So these maps, which are just an example, you can use other tools as well. We can use them in a hierarchical way, as we saw on the last slide, or as we see it here, for example, in the form of an org chart. Actually, this is an example of a board-level view of a hospital organization. And of course, there are different departments. It's the medical department. It's the treatment facility management. It's the hotel department of the hospital. And we see in the top right corner security and BCM. So these maps are very well suited to understand organizations, and that's exactly what we have to do when doing BIA. Okay, I'm skipping this slide. It's anyway probably too small. It just shows that these maps which I'm using are part of a larger approach. So let's come back to the outputs or the achievements for I have to wrap up. Okay, 15 minutes left. Yes, I'm nearly finished. I just got a message from the organizer. Yes, we are in time. Okay. So these standards, these maps may help to graphically visualize the standards. You know, if you have seen such a standard, it's a long document with a lot of text, and tools like these help understand the standards, but they also are an assessment tool, a BIA support tool. It's about the presentation of the findings. We probably need an electronic representation, a spreadsheet or Word document, a PowerPoint, whatever. Before that, we have to start a questionnaire, or have to prepare a questionnaire, and extract information from single persons or in workshops. And finally, we have to visualize the results, and especially overlaps, gaps, and redundancies are features or properties which have to be addressed, and which have to be treated in order to again obtain an well-designed or well-prepared BIA with a sufficient level of quality and maturity. Okay, so let's wrap up. What are the critical success factors? What should you try to observe if we want to make the BIA a success? First of all, follow best practice guidelines, such as the BCI guidelines and ISO standards. Very important, top management commitment. BIA is a project. We have to define the right type of the BIA approach, large company, small company, whatever. And it has to be compatible with the company's structure in order really to obtain a true and fair representation. As situations or organizations are hierarchical, we probably have to represent this in the BIA as well, because the dependencies are more or less complex. So we have to properly map the situation or the BIA dependencies according to the complexity of the organization. And finally, I think today not a big deal, but we have to use the right level of electronic representation, communication, and archiving. If we go back to next BIA in a year or two, we have to find out what is really what was really important with the previous BIA. Okay, this was my presentation. I'm thanking you for your attention, and here is some questions. I see we have 2 questions, but I do not see the questions. We'll send you in the end, okay? I am asking the organizer if we still have to deal with some questions or not. Okay, here's a question. I read the question. Whether BCP to be designed to support the minimum operations required to resume the business activities processes as agreed based on the BI study, or should be supporting all the operations of the organization. The issue is many times the expectations from BCP are set so high that the entire operations of the organization are recovered, resumed. Yes, certainly we have to concentrate on the core activities and the most important processes of the organization. As I said, the expectations are high, ending up with a duplication of the company, but this is not realistic. So one of the big challenges of the BI actually is to limit ourselves and cut down all the requirements really to the bones, and the most important processes. I always say the BI serves to find out what would hurt you most if you lose it. So what is so important that you cannot afford to lose it for a long time. A long time, maybe seconds or days or weeks. Another colleague puts it more drastically and says, okay, what would kill you first if you don't have it any longer? And it's really a matter of priorities. Okay, a second question. There is a time gap between the time disruption happens and the BCP command and control assesses the disruption crisis and invokes BCP. So when deciding on RTO, whether the RTO time is to be measured, reckoned from the time of disruption or from the time BCP is invoked. By definition, it's the time of disruption, regardless if you have felt the disruption or not. Actually, this is the definition, and it just makes sense. The question correctly addresses there's the dilemma that not all disruptions are detected immediately, and this raises another issue touching the subject of monitoring. So if we are delivering a time-critical processes, time-critical products or services, we should know immediately when this delivery has stopped. It's certainly a bad thing that our customers would call us and say, your server is not working, and we would say, we don't know, we have to check it. So monitoring and detection is quite important. Okay, there is another question. Is there any specific methodology to prepare the BIA? The answer is no, because all companies are different. The setups are different, small, large, very sensible to interruptions, less sensible, well documented, not so well documented. So the methodology to prepare or to perform the BIA is different, and this new ISO standard, as well as existing good practice guidelines and existing standards, give you examples to choose from, but there is no one size fits all. There's methodology. Okay. Hi, while doing a BI, can we include external parties? Yes, of course. External parties are very important. It's a very good question. So BI is not just looking at our own level, but it's encompassing all the environment, especially the suppliers. If we are depending on external suppliers, and I think every company is depending on external suppliers, then we have to address these requirements as well. And as a matter of fact, our technical committee released another standard, 22318 on supply chain continuity, addressing all those issues with external suppliers. In today's world, everything is globalized, and we get our screws from there, and we get our software from here, and the telephone operator is in Ireland, whatever it is. We certainly as an organization would not survive without our suppliers, so it's really very much important. But there are also external parties like neighbors. If I'm a chemical factory and my neighbors are wary about a chemical spill through the air or through the water, then I have to certainly include external parties like neighbors or government organizations and things like that. So very good question, thank you. It's a must to include external parties. I'm waiting for another question. Is there another question coming up, Gita? Okay. Is there a trial version of Socrates Maps available as a download for us to try? I am not sure. I have to check that. But I guess so, yes. If you get in touch with me, we can organize that. I think it's available and certainly necessary. Okay, are there other BIA tools or templates for reference? Yes, there are many BIA tools and also BCM tools. If we talk about tools, we have to address certain issues. First of all, tools are not, especially tools which comprise, which cover the whole BCM lifecycle, are not cheap, and it takes maybe a lot of training to understand them. But yes, there are tools for BIA and also for other elements, for the other elements of the BCM lifecycle. So a tool just for BIA is, if you really want to go for the ultimate thing, then you might consider using a tool which guides you through the whole of the life cycle, which means you just need to enter the data once, and all the players, like the BCM team, would then be available during the whole life cycle. There is a new question. Business continuity planning is a program and needs to be managed in itself. When ISO 22301 expects the project plan around BIA, what exactly does it envision? Yes, of course, business continuity planning or BC approach is, I say it starts as a project, but finally, as it doesn't have an end, by definition, it is not a project. But as the BIA is not a continuous thing, but it may be done from, let's say, October to January, and from January to April we do BC strategy selection and implementation later this year. So we come back to BIA maybe in 1 year from now. And as the BIA actually comprises many players in the organization, maybe 20, 50, 150, then this certainly has to be treated as a project. We cannot just say, okay, this afternoon we start with the BIA, but people have to be invited, project team has to be set up, and funding has to be obtained, rooms have to be booked, things like that, everything. There's a lot of preparation, and the execution is a project, and it has an end, it has a report at the end. So especially for the BIA phase, it does make sense, and the new standard also declares the BIA to be a project. Next question, ISO 31000 and ISO 30010 do recommend some methods. Which of them are applicable for BIA? Okay, thanks. Good question. ISO 31000 series is on risk management, and as I said, the base standard 22301 requires risk management, risk assessment to be done, but it's on the 223 series side, on the business continuity standard side, there is no mandatory method of risk management prescribed. Of course, you can use the ISO 31000 series standards. They are also, I think, literally recommended in these standards, and the business continuity side does not prescribe any standard, any existing best practice risk management, risk assessment approach is fine. So to come back to your questions, all of these ISO 31000 standards are applicable to the BIA. There is another long question. Financial impact in BI, how can we determine the impact? For example, under the legal department, they have a process called litigation. This process or function is important and have to be up and running after disaster in case there is any legal suit that will affect the organization. Financially, however, in other cases, even during the disaster, there is no litigation, then this process can be down for weeks and weeks. How can we to do a BIA. It's also not a straightforward thing. You probably have to undertake a course change, or come back to the beginning, or involve other people, or in the end, in most cases, you have to come back and put all the responses in proportion to each other. If somebody says, yes, this process is important, and other department says this is not so important, then you have to moderate, and there are healthy discussions in the company during such a BI phase, such a BI project. Okay. I'm getting a message that we have 5 minutes, maybe. Okay, time to wrap up. Yes, I thank you very much for your attention and the interesting questions. We have to finish this webinar. A certain glance on the complexities of the BIA. It's always a very challenging part of a BCM project. And if there are more questions, please get back in touch with me. I'd be glad to continue the discussion with you. Thanks for your attention, and hope to see you soon in another webinar. Bye-bye. Thank you.